Hi, my name's Stephen Aitken and welcome to Aitken Real Estate's second Facebook Live streaming broadcast. We're going to talk to you today about methods of sale. Thank you to all the people that viewed my last broadcast, and to the comments and the people that have contacted us. It's very encouraging. So today we're going to talk about, as I said, the methods of sale. The first thing to understand is that when you put your home, or contemplating putting your home on the market, it's the whole point of any method of sale is to actually find a buyer and get the highest price from that buyer. So the common three areas of selling your home are public auction, private sale and tender. But there's some variations to those, and the first is that we're going to cover is the open listing or open sale. So that is usually often thought by some sellers of being quite effective, because what they want to do is it opens it up to a lot of real estate agents, and with nothing more, no real advertising, and lets the agents compete to find a buyer and get you the in theory the highest price. But actually what ends up happening is you end up dealing with an agent that is the weakest link in the chain, and there's no real determining factor of making sure that that buyer's paid the highest possible price. It's more about getting the deal done by the agent just in case they miss out to somebody else. So the second part of open, or rather than a open sale or an open listing, is a conjunctional sale. Now, this is often used by agents when they feel that they're going to miss out to a competitor, and what they will do is suggest that both agents sign up to the listing agreement, and then they both work on it. But again, the failure of this system really is that one of those agents is probably not going to do as much work as the other, and the one agent may or may not be competent, but the agent that doesn't do the most work will end up getting paid an amount for the successful sale, if there is one. Now we start to move on to the most common areas, and this is we'll cover auctions last, I think, for today, but the main ones are auction, private sale and tender. Now, tender is an interesting topic, because tender does offer some real benefits to the seller. It's there's a date that if you've got a certain time that you need to sell by, you can set your conditions on the tender, such as when the tender must end. You can set conditions such as settlement times. You could set all sorts of conditions that affect the process. The other thing with tenders is that it's private, so the other buyers that are tendering for this won't know what their competitors, if there are any, are going to put in. The problem that I have with tenders in general is that I think that in the end, a tender with a date is not a very efficient method for sellers. Most negotiation books will say that having a final date doesn't allow the negotiators the best opportunity to get the buyer's highest price. And the other thing with a tender, ultimately there's not a lot of negotiation. What you're leaving the buyers to do in most cases is make up their own mind. And while somebody may pay a good or high price, ultimately what you really want in any agent is their ability to negotiate, which is I've mentioned before. So tender is certainly an option. It's used quite successfully in a number of areas, but it does have some limitations to it. The next thing to look at, I think, is private sale. So private sale, when we look into most homes that get sold, private sale is still the significant process used by the majority of people. It doesn't get as much press or notoriety as auctions or public auctions, but it certainly is the preferred method in general by many sellers, and it's certainly the preferred method by most buyers. most buyers, when they've been polled, is that they would much prefer to buy privately than they would by public auction. So let's have a look at the private sale method. The private sale method is working out what price to put the property on the market at. Sometimes agents will use a private sale and use a price range. The problem again with these sort of things is that with a price range, most buyers, if they see a range, will obviously, if they're going to make a proposal, go to the bottom of that range as a general rule. Most agents use price ranges to a large degree to bait price, and there are a few that get the ranges right, but ultimately that the whole point of any method is to attract buyers. And I think most methods, all of them, will attract a certain amount of buyers. What we're trying to achieve is the buyer's highest price. So a private sale is eminently acceptable. It gives the buyers the opportunity to put in things like subject to finance and subject to a pest inspection. Agents would sometimes argue that that's not a good thing, but ultimately, for most people these days, they still, even though that they've got finance, they need that just that added bit of protection to be able to go to their bank and make sure that what they've been told about their finances is correct. And also, a lot of people do want their properties checked by somebody reputable to make sure that there's no structural issues or pest infestation such as rats or termites or anything like that. So I think that private sale works very well. The argument against private sale often is that when you set a price, you can't get above that asking price, and that is simply a myth. At Aitken Real Estate, we do have a method that's a combination of other ways of selling that we can demonstrate to our clients that we can get well above the asking price, and in about 60% of our cases, we get substantially above the asking price. But sticking to the topic at hand, private sale is a method. The other way of selling is private sale or sale by date. So it's not much different to a private sale. It just ends up being that you can set an end date where that people have to put in their proposals. Again, a lot of agents use price ranges. Buyers in general are not keen on this. They've worked out pretty well that agents underestimate or underquote their prices. So I think that ultimately a sale by date again has some positive signs with it. If you must get your proposals or you want your proposals in by a certain date, but I again remind you that most negotiation books would say that having that deadline is not the most efficient to getting the most from a given buyer. So that's sale by date. I think that then we can move on to off-market is another area that agents sometimes talk about. I know that at our company that we've done numerous sales off-market. Off-market really simply means that it doesn't get advertised, the property doesn't get advertised publicly. The agency or the agent involved knows of a property where the sellers may sell if the right buyer at the right price came along. And sometimes these sales result in extraordinarily good prices because you've got buyers in the whole scheme of this. Buyers buy with their heart, sellers sell with their head. So the truth is that's why you need a negotiator, because the buyers themselves need somebody to show them the property and persuade them why they should be buying that. Now let's move on to public auctions, or auctions in general, public and private auctions. Public auctions are these days held out to be the bee's knees of selling. For the most part, they get the press because there's lots of light and colour. They're a lot of fun for the agents, but more importantly, they sometimes attract some extraordinary prices, and that's true. They often get good prices, they sometimes get great prices, and occasionally they get extraordinary prices. The question for a seller is not so much that that happens. The question for a seller is, if you're selling via any method, is how can you guarantee that you're getting the buyer's highest price? And this is the question that should keep sellers awake at night. The point with auctions is, and I can speak from experience here, I have done hundreds of auctions, hundreds of public auctions, so I have an intimate understanding of the systems involved, and nothing has changed in 30 years, in my 30 years of real estate. The issue with public auctions is simply this, that while you might have 2 competitors, you might have 3 competitors, at the end of the day, even if it gets a high price, what's to say that that buyer has paid all their money? Now, as an example of this, there's a chap that works at the Melbourne Zoo called John Burke. His name is, let me just clear it for you, John Burkett. Now, John Burkett lives in a property, and he was asked what his property was worth, and he said 1.2 million. Now, we have the phone number of John Burkett, so this isn't a story. John Burkett said 1.2 million. And they said, how can you be so sure? And he said, well, the place next door to me sold for, at public auction, for 900,000. And they said, well, hang on a second. If the property sold next door for 900,000, how can you be so sure that yours is 1.2? And he said, well, the properties are pretty much identical. However, after they bought, the people that had bought the property at 900,000, he went in and introduced himself and welcomed them to the neighbourhood and was being a good neighbour. And he said, are you happy with your purchase? Did you feel that you got the right property at the right buy? And they said, absolutely, we were prepared to pay 1.2 million. And this is the whole point with auctions. They get a wonderful amount of press, but ultimately there's no way to discern whether that buyer has paid all their money. And in most cases, the buyers will pay more. Now, that might be a small amount, $1,000 or $2,000, but sometimes it can be $50,000 or $100,000. And in extraordinary cases, it can be substantially more than that. So, again, with methods of sale, the tough part for a seller is that auctions are sold on really hope. So an agent sells an auction on saying to most sellers, look, auctions are here to sell it 3 ways. We'll sell it prior to auction, on the day, or if, for the heaven forbid, anything happens that it doesn't sell on the day, it's designed to sell it in the couple of weeks afterwards. But the auctions are really designed to promote the agent. The agent gets an extraordinary amount of advertising money for auctions, and that's why, for most agents, that's their favoured method of selling. Certainly with private sales and even the tender process, most agents ask sellers to pay advertising money, and we've covered advertising in general in the last broadcast. But today, with the amount of money that's thrown at marketing properties, if agents were so sure that their method was absolutely certain and it is in the best interests of the seller, you would reasonably expect that they would absorb that marketing and maybe charge a bit more in their fees. But the reason that agents charge separate marketing and separate fees is because they know that once a seller has to stump up, whether prior or at the end of the process, has to stump up and pay that advertising money, the sellers have skin in the game. So even if the agent is poor or they're unhappy, most people shrug their shoulders and go, look, all agents are pretty much the same. We've got to do this again. We're not going to pay another $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000. Let's just deal with the devil we know rather than the devil we don't. So agents are well aware of this psychological bent. And so what they do is the more money they can extract is the more skin that's in the game by the seller. In other words, the more commitment that they have to make. And ultimately, that the pressure becomes on the seller rather than the agent. The agent certainly is in the box position of a no-lose situation regardless. So I think that auctions are an interesting aberration in this market where, it gains a lot of press. I think that for the time that if you're selling today, I think that you've got to look at companies that are prepared to absorb their advertising, that are prepared to step up and genuinely work for the seller and provide a system and certainly a skill set and demonstrable skill set and a demonstrable system that they can prove that they can achieve the highest price for a seller without all this enormous amounts of advertising that goes through the system. And there are a lot of stakeholders that climb on board with this advertising, of course, and in the promotion and marketing of the homes. And I'm getting a little off track, but going back to things like staging and all those sort of things, any seller and any agent can find a buyer for any house. All they have to do is put a sign around their neck, walk up to the biggest shopping centre, stand around saying, I have a house for sale, this is the address, put your name and address in the bucket. And there is absolutely no doubt that any seller can find a buyer. The strength of an agency and an agent is being able to make that buyer that's interested in a property pay all their money. So when we talk about methods of sale, you've got to really sort of cut to the chase on this and say why is an agent recommending a certain method. So public auctions, as I said, are generally done because it promotes the agent, it's great for the agent, it gives them profile, you can extract enormous amounts of advertising, less so in private sale, a little less probably in tender. Sale by date is much the same. So with the exception of probably off-market sales and open listings, the rest have a situation where you're having to pay substantial amounts of money. My advice to any seller is you should never pay advertising to any agent, us included, as a separate item. You should ask for the agent to carry the risk. Why should the seller put themselves at a disadvantage to benefit the agent? The other thing is too, in signing off on any of these methods, I would argue that most of the authorities that agents get sellers to sign are generally as a minimum 60-day authorities, and they're also 90, sometimes 120-day authorities. While that's an acceptable position from my point of view, the problem that I have again with most authorities is that they don't have a get-out clause. So a seller should be able to have a reasonable exit strategy that doesn't cost them any money. So that I don't know of any agent locally to us, but certainly there are only a number of agents around Victoria and Australia that offer an exit strategy. And I assure every seller, you should, if you don't have an agent that offers it straight up, you should draft a letter that says to the agent, if I'm unhappy with you and you can't rectify my problem, then I'm withdrawing from my sale and I don't owe you any money. Now I can absolutely guarantee you that most agents would turn pale at the thought of a seller having to, or having a seller dictating terms like that, and they will say, well, that's not acceptable. There's lots of reasons that they will give you that that's not possible. But the whole point of this is that the agent is supposed to, morally and legally, to get the most amount of money for a seller. And these strategies, for the most part, just don't achieve it. Now, at Aitken Real Estate, we have a cross-pollination of these. We have a property silent bid system where it's a cross between public auction, private sale and a tender. Like a silent tender, but with all the advantages of the competition of an auction. And when going back to public auctions for a second, most people would say to you that when you're going to auction, that they're competitive. And that's true. They can sometimes be highly competitive, but without a shadow of a doubt, auctions are comparative. So the most important thing to understand from a seller's point of view is that the buyer, the end buyer, only uses a little bit more that they have to do to beat the underbidder. So the only person that you can absolutely guarantee in a sale, in an auction process, is that's used all their money up is the underbidder. So the underbidder uses all their money. The final bidder has just one more bid above that, and they're done. And we can prove time and time, we've acted occasionally for buyers. We did one some time ago down in Beaumaris, where in fact our client was prepared to pay 1.96 million, and we bought it for 1.8. So our client saved 160,000 by bidding at auction. And while that mightn't be common every week, certainly it is not uncommon. And if you really asked most buyers, would they have paid something more at public auction, the answer is yes. So what you've got to work out as a seller is, how can I make sure that I get every dollar that I'm entitled to and every dollar that that buyer is prepared to pay? And there are ways. And there are not just at Aitken Real Estate, there are agents across Victoria and Australia that do employ this property silent bid, or otherwise known as sometimes called a buyer's price declaration, to achieve a buyer's highest price. But I might add, in using that, you still need a skilled agent and agency that employs negotiation systems to ensure that that buyer pays all their money. Now, again, I remind buyers might be looking at this saying, well, that's pretty tough. We don't know whether we want to buy from an agency like you. But the truth is, again, buyers will do what buyers will do, which is they will buy a house that they love, and they mightn't enjoy having to pay all their money, but ultimately that's what an agent should be. An agent should be shoulder to shoulder with the seller, ensuring that the seller gets the maximum amount of money. And that, again, with coming back to this auction versus private situation, with auctions, there's a thing called conditioning with auctions. Now, again, agents will roll their eyes and say it doesn't happen. As I said, I have an enormous amount of experience at this. And the truth is, it used to happen, it happens today, it happens regularly, that agents concentrate in auctions on the seller's lowest price, which is the reserve, but they never ever concentrate on the buyer's highest price. So that's the whole crux of this matter in selling your property. What you're trying to do is not so much work out what is the best method of sale. There is really only one clear method of sale, and that is a method where the other buyers' proposals are secret from other buyers, so as they can't compare notes. So that's very important. The other area that I attack in method of selling, and you should also, if you're a seller, go and do some mystery shopping of agents, is go and ask agents, whether they're auctions or private sale or anything like that. Ask agents why the seller is selling. Now, if they give you an answer such as it's a divorce, or they've retired and they've bought somewhere else, run from that agent. That is just not an acceptable position. The acceptable position for an agent when they're selling a client's home is it's for sale. If the buyer wants to buy it, it's unnecessary for the buyer to know. The only reason a buyer needs to know why a seller is selling is for leverage. And a good negotiator is not going to offer that up. So that's very important to mystery shop agents. And the other thing that'll come up both in all methods of sale is that when you're talking to the agent is, what do you think that the sellers will take? So it's a very common question. At Aitken Real Estate, our absolute reply is the sellers will accept in the face of no higher proposal than the asking price, we understand that the clients will accept the asking price. And the way we do business is, as I said, 60% of the time we get above the asking price, and this is a combination of skill and systems. But in most cases, or in a lot of cases, you can go to many salespeople and many agencies, and they will give you a pretty direct answer. And again, that is an agent or agency that's on a seller's side. So while it seems a pretty simple system in selecting the type of method of sale, there's all the other variations. Open for inspections versus private inspections. Why would you open your house to all the non-buyers, to the neighbours? Why shouldn't the agency, and why the agency should, and the agent should, qualify the buyers before they ever go through a home? That's what they should do. You should know as a seller who's coming through your property. Agents rely on activity to suggest to a seller why their asking price or why their reserve price is too high. And as I said, having done auctions for many, many years, their methods that it's employed today just haven't changed, and they still, the market at the moment is good. So the sellers appear for their neighbours and friends, if they've got a great result by auction, it also it looks like it's great old time to be had by all. But again, I wonder if they knew with John Burkett, or if they knew when we acted for our a buyer, that if there was $160,000 or $300,000 left on the table, I wonder how happy they would be. In our method, we can show dozens of times, if not multiple dozens of times, where we've sold properties where the final proposal has been, and where the underbid, or the second highest proposal, has been $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $80,000 away. Now, to me, is if you don't care about your final selling price, then a public auction's great. But if you care about how much you end up within your pocket, then public auctions are certainly not the place to get the highest price for your home. The thing that comes back to tender is that I like the people that don't use our system do use tender, because again it gives sellers an opportunity to make decisions without being under pressure. And that's another thing that auctions do. Auctions are designed to genuinely put the sellers under pressure to make decisions where they might otherwise not. Now, the other thing that I'd like to mention too with auctions is, and in the market in general, of the properties that come to the market, in an average market, about 20% get auctioned. I know it sounds like, and it looks like 80%, but that's not true. In an average market, it's about 20%. In this market, where the interest rates are low and the real estate is doing extremely well, then about 25%, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, but about a quarter of the properties go to auction. So when you're assessing, a quarter of the properties go to auction, and agents would claim that on a good day, 75 or 80% is what gets sold. So what you're saying is 80% of 25% is what you're basing your decisions on. And they are lousy stats. They are simply lousy stats. And the other thing that happens with an auction is that you cut out all these buyers that would buy the property, that would pay more money, as if they could put it subject to finance, if they could get a pest inspection without spending $500 or $1,000 and being blown out of the water because the agents are underquoting, or they're certainly lowering their range to bait price and get more people at the auction. So the reality is, buyers in general much prefer to sit down and discuss, and that's the opportunity for the agents to, quite frankly, get the most amount of money from those buyers. And that, for everybody that's thinking of selling, I suggest that you try and source out agents that will sit down with you, that will discuss all the methods, and that's fine, and their arguments of why a certain method is viable, but have a good look at what they're saying and make sure that they're not suggesting a method of sale that's actually in their best interest, not yours. So coming back to or summarising what we've said, there's multiple ways of selling your home. The most important thing for me is have an exit strategy for regardless of the agent that you choose, to make sure that you can walk away without penalty. That's the most important thing. Why should you put your most valuable asset, as a general rule, up to the market to assess what's going on the basis that you have to pay? That's just a nonsense. Any agent that suggests that auctions get the highest price out of a market is just not true. There is certainly enough words written online that you can check to verify what I'm saying, and it's written by lots of commentators that aren't agents. The problem with all these methods is please don't get caught up in paying enormous amounts of advertising. Make the agent take the risk. That's what they should be doing. Agents get well paid for their efforts. I think that a good agent is always prepared to stand up and suggest to you the best method that will get you the most amount of money. Please give me a call at the office on 9583 0996. Email me at swa@aitkenrealestate.com.au or Facebook Messenger me. We're more than happy to discuss. If you're not in Melbourne or you're around Australia, we can certainly give you some information. We can suggest that we have sister agents around Australia that operate in a similar method. Our results speak for themselves. We have demonstrable proof that when we sell a property, that we can get the highest price from any given buyer. And for the most part, most of these other methods do not. And for the most part, you are going to, except with us and some of our sister agents, you are going to pay a high price for the exercise. And unfortunately, that's why real estate agents get the reputation that they get, because they are a lot of times self-serving rather than serving the people that they're morally and legally bound to look after. So thank you for listening to me today. Please, again, give me a call anytime that you think that we can help you. And next time we are going to talk about hiring in real estate. So if you're thinking about coming into real estate, we're going to do a short discussion on why you should and perhaps the reasons why you shouldn't. From me, Stephen Aitken at Aitken Real Estate, thanks for watching today. Bye.